Welcome back to episode 4 of A Very Welsh Park. Actually, should it be welcome back? I've always wondered. I guess I should say welcome back to the series, but this is the first time you've seen episode 4, unless you're rewatching this video, in which case my original intro stands. Well, whichever circumstance is true, hello. I'm glad you're here. Last week we added a coaster to the park, and as I'm sure you can imagine, I don't think I've recovered from the excitement. This week we're adding a flat ride, shop, and a water ride. It's truly high-octane stuff. The flat ride in question is the Golden Eagle, and I began by giving it a border using sawn logs. I lined said border with stake fencing, matching the queue for our dive coaster. The floor and I had quite a heated argument, so I resorted to covering it up with wooden balcony pieces. I know, ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away, blah blah blah. To create some variation, I used wood panelling for the ride queue. Continuing the log theme, I created some more tree stump queue post covers. Considering our ride butts right up against a gaping hole in the ground, some safety fencing seemed sensible. By this point you'll be sensing a theme. I copied the ride sign from Hawatsin and slid it over for our new ride. Although I did make this one freestanding, so don't ever call me lazy, okay? We're not well known for eagles in Wales, but peregrine falcons are very much commonplace. So with that, our first flat ride has a name. Once again, recolouring the O because art. Just try and stop me adding some queue cover. You can't. I used pillars and Idro's shade sails. Next, I created a trellis using Idro beams. This queue may as well be sponsored by Idro. With the first section complete, I could then copy and paste to my heart's content. A trellis isn't much of a trellis without some foliage, so I added various wall climbers. And just like that, the ride is done and we're onto the shop. I wanted an octagonal kiosk central to the plaza. I'm not particular at all. I used wood just as a placeholder before deciding on the final material a bit later. I stole our pillars from the coaster drop for more of that juicy cohesion we all love. Next, I added some adventure theming in the form of temple pieces and planks. And there. I chose stucco. I bet that was worth the wait, wasn't it? After adding some stake fencing to the roof, I could then copy the whole lot around the rest of the build. And what shops will be occupying our kiosk? Well, the pinnacle of Planet Coaster food and drink, of course, Chief Beef and Cosmic Cow. With the shops in, I popped a roof on top using plaster walls. I don't think you're prepared for the level of realism detail this roof is about to receive. I don't think anyone could be. I added ducting, AC, cabling, and grubby dirt. As I always do, I wrapped our shop fronts in basic shapes to allow recolouring, in this case, white. After shoving a door on the side, I added some vending machines, 2 of which aren't real, but don't tell the guests. Replicating the design from out front, I popped some advertising screens on opposite sides of the build. With the addition of our shops, our staff need somewhere to rest nearby. I obviously could have just popped a staff room inside the kiosk, but that wouldn't be realistic. I decided to utilise the back of our entrance toilet block and double it up as a staff room. With the facility in place and path connected, I cordoned it off with fencing and did a spot of terrain painting. Once again, I'll populate this area with clutter later in the series. And now for the reason most of you are here, the thing that's actually in the thumbnail, the log flume. I went with a custom Revachon, namely a copy of Water Fun Factory from Pleasurewood Hills. With that in mind, I dug a 2-metre trench and filled it with water. I then lined the whole thing in that signature log flume blue. Sinking the whole thing a pixel below the path allowed me to tuck a concrete border around the whole thing. I went with an immersive queue line allowing for ride interaction. Once again, continuing the nature theme, I created a log fence using, well, logs. I lowered a bunch near the drop to allow for good guest sightlines and a splash zone. With this in mind, I placed a vista point which will force guests to come and point and take pictures. I covered the post with a bin. As lovely as our log fence is, it's probably not adequate protection considering the water hazard, so I added some secondary chain link fencing. For a nice realistic touch, I decided our FLUME is sponsored by Pip Shop Water, so I added some signage. With everything in place, I extended our plaza using the Victorian tile. Time for that splash zone I mentioned earlier. I created some decals using art shapes and text using TMTK lettering. Our splash zone is currently lacking any splash, so I added a water effect and then triggered it anytime the FLUME hit the bottom of the drop. Time for the queue. Because the path goes under the ride, all supports have been automatically removed, so I added some custom ones. For the queue itself, I went with a jetty theme using pillars, beams and planks. To save myself from having to fence on a curve, I opted for just covering the gap with chain link. Making a start on the station, I began by wrapping the foundation in more of the blue metal panelling. I created custom walls with beams, planks and pillars. I covered the floor in wood panelling to give it a lighter, beachy feel. To assist in the prevention of silly folk falling into the water, I added some hazard strips. Whilst on a health and safety frenzy, I handmade some wooden fencing and popped a couple of life rings on them. I popped a lid on top using corrugated iron and then gave it some additional support. Speaking of support, don't forget you can become a member of the channel via YouTube or Patreon and receive wonderful perks such as early access. Blimey! Time for some detailing. I added some baggage holds and appropriate signage, along with a pretend lady person to assist with said baggage. Back out in the queue, I added various nautical props to this empty space. I created some custom queue covers using pillars, planks and wooden brackets. I created a custom ride sign using more pillars and planks. And what will our ride be called, I hear you scream obnoxiously into my ear? Well, considering this is largely inspired by the FLUME at Pleasurewood Hills, I decided to take its name too. Not the ridiculous new name, but the far superior previous name, Timber Falls. Our ride needs some theming, but the park isn't flippin' made of money. I created some circular tropical flower beds. How exotic. A simple and cheap addition, but builds some immersion and breaks up the sightline a bit. I added a couple of outdoor speakers, although considering these are fake, I felt it necessary to add a real ambient speaker buried underneath. Oh, by the way, I haven't neglected the water treatment that would accompany this ride. That will be built along with the other backstage areas at the end of the series. Back inside, I laid some cabling and installed an electrical cabinet, all by myself. Goodness, I'm so smart. Next, I added a speaker and painted it white to better match its surroundings. Back on the safety front, I wired in some cheeky CCTV at crucial sections of the ride. It's lighting time. Running with our nautical theme, I hung some nautical glass lanterns and placed some blue uplighters. To balance the aquatic glow, I threw a couple of warm oil lamps in. I buried a couple of LED fixtures into our flower beds to throw some green and blue onto the foliage. For the catwalks, I went with a more clinical white. Well, I don't think our maintenance team would care for a nice turquoise while they perform a harness rescue. Lastly, I added some lighting to our new food kiosk. I don't know about you, but I feel rather overwhelmed by the excitement of today's episode and need to lay down for at least a week. I'll catch you once I've recovered. See you then.